Take a deep breath. Can you feel it? The air here is different. It's thick, so humid you could almost taste it, a mixture of sweet jasmine, the damp, earthy decay of the swamp, and a hint of rust and history. This is Louisiana, a land that doesn't just live in the present, but breathes with the lungs of its past. Every street in New Orleans, every moss-draped oak tree in the countryside, is a silent witness to the stories that have come before. Do you believe a place can be intoxicated by its own history? Drunk on its tragedies, its beliefs, its revolutions, and its unforgivable sins. If Iowa was a horror hidden beneath the silence of the fields, then Louisiana is a fever dream, a frenetic dance between life and death, where the line between the two worlds isn't a wall, but a thin lace veil. Tonight, we will pull that veil aside. We will leave the quiet behind to immerse ourselves in the whispers and the screams. Our journey will take us through 4 distinct circles of Louisiana's hell. First, we will break down the door of a magnificent mansion in the French Quarter, only to expose the unimaginable cruelty hidden in an attic. Next, we will live inside the paranoia that gripped an entire city, a time when jazz music became the only talisman against a demon with an axe. Then, we will search for the ghost of an enslaved woman among the ancient oaks of a cursed plantation, where her unjust sorrow lingers in a mirror. And finally, we will push deep into the suffocating swamps to hear the terrifying howl of the Rougarou, a creature, half man and half beast, born from ancient curses. As always at Horror Stories Hub, you will not be just a listener. You will be an unwilling participant. Tonight, you will be the firefighter who feels the heat of the flames and the horror of what they reveal. You will be the citizen bolting his door, praying the music is loud enough to ward off a killer. You will be the curious tourist who discovers that ghost stories are sometimes more than just stories. And you will be the young man who comes face to face with a primal fear in the darkness of the swamp. 4 stories, 4 souls, 4 perspectives on a land haunted by its own history. So take one more deep breath. Are you ready to breathe the suffocating air of Louisiana? Our journey begins on a fateful night in 1834, as a fire alarm rings out on Royal Street, and a brave man is about to discover that hell is real, and it has a specific address. Story 1. The Lalaurie Mansion. The Devil's Attic now? Listen to that alarm bell. Let it pull you back in time to a fateful night in New Orleans. 1834. Follow a firefighter into the darkness. A man who thought he was only fighting flames, but was about to confront something far more destructive. This is his story.
The smell. Almighty God. The smell. That was the first thing that hit us. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't the usual smell of burnt flesh from a fire. It was something else. A sickeningly sweet smell of rot, mingled with a stench of disease and something like sulfur. It coated the back of your throat, made you want to vomit everything in your stomach. We had just broken down the attic door. Below us, the whole street was in chaos. But up here, it was dead silent. The light from my torch flickered across the darkness, and then I saw the first pair of eyes. They didn't look at me. They just stared into nothing. The eyes of a woman chained to the wall, her neck stretched unnaturally in a bizarre iron collar. Her skin, dear God. What do you do when you face a sight your mind refuses to comprehend? When what you see doesn't belong to God's world, but is clearly the work of a demon in human skin. I'm a firefighter. I've seen death. I've seen burned bodies. But I was never, ever prepared for this. This wasn't the aftermath of a fire. This was a laboratory from hell. Before that night, my life in New Orleans had a clear order. The days were hot and humid. The nights were loud. I was a firefighter, a dangerous but respectable job. We were a brotherhood, men who faced the flames together. Our work was simple. When the bell rang, we went. We saved people. We saved property. There were good days and bad days, but there was always a clear line between the person who needed help and the danger. And in that order of things, the Lalaurie Mansion on Royal Street was a symbol of elegance and power. Have you ever looked at a magnificent house and wondered what secrets are hidden behind its closed doors and lit windows? We often admire the facade, but rarely dare to think of the darkness that might lurk within. To us, that house was a landmark, grand, 3 stories, with elaborate wrought-iron balconies. It was the home of Dr. Louis and his wife, Madame Delphine Lalaurie, especially Madame Lalaurie. She was the jewel of New Orleans society, beautiful, wealthy, known for throwing the most lavish parties. When our fire engine would pass, sometimes we'd see her on the balcony, waving a lace fan, a perfect smile on her face. She was the very picture of grace and class. We common folk looked up to people like her with a certain reverence. They lived in another world, a world of wealth and power we could never touch. We protected their homes from fire, just as we protected the most humble shacks. That was the order of things. At least, that's what I believed. I had no idea that behind that graceful facade was a rot more terrible than any fire I had ever faced. The night of April 10th, the bells rang furiously. A fire in the French Quarter on Royal Street. When we arrived, flames were already licking out of the windows of the kitchen wing, and I recognized it at once. It was the Lala Mansion. A crowd had already gathered, their anxious faces illuminated by the orange glow. Our work began immediately, hauling the pumper, fighting the flames, evacuating. But something was very strange. As we tried to enter the main house, Madame Lalaurie herself blocked our path. She seemed terrifyingly calm in the midst of the chaos. "Be careful of my furniture," she said, her voice like ice. "It is quite valuable." Not a word about her servants, her slaves. When does a strange occurrence cross the line from eccentricity to a warning sign? At what point do you realize the person you're facing isn't just unusual, but dangerous? For me, it was the moment I saw the cook, a black woman, perhaps 70 years old, chained to the kitchen stove by an iron collar. She was in a panic, but not from the fire. "Save the others," she begged us, tears streaming down her face. "The mistress keeps them locked up in the attic. She never lets anyone up there," She confessed that she had set the fire herself as a final, desperate act to draw attention, to let people know what was happening in that house. A woman who would rather burn herself and the house to the ground than spend another day under her master's rule. In that moment, I knew this was no ordinary fire. The flames we could see were only the surface of a much, much deeper hell. The fire in the kitchen was being contained, but the cook's words had started another fire in the hearts of us and the gathered crowd. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. The stories people had whispered about Madame Lalaurie's cruelty, about slaves who disappeared without a trace, were now being shouted in the street. We demanded the key to the attic from Madame Lalaurie. She refused. "This is my home," she shrieked, her aristocratic facade vanishing, leaving only venom. "You have no right." But she was wrong. The crowd began to press in. They roared for justice. I looked into the eyes of my fellow firemen. We were no longer fighting a fire. We were standing before a locked door, and behind it was an unforgivable crime. Have you ever had to make a choice you knew would change everything? A decision that went against orders, but followed your moral compass. That heavy feeling right before you swing the axe, knowing there's no going back. My captain gave the signal. It was all we needed. We pushed past Dr. Lalaurie, who was trying to reason with us, and headed up the stairs. The attic door was thick oak, barred from the outside. I took my axe. The shouts of the crowd below seemed to fuel my strength. With every swing, I wasn't just breaking down a door. I was breaking down the wall of silence that had hidden this horror for too long. The door burst open. Darkness and that foul stench rushed out like a breath from hell. I stepped in first, holding my torch high. What I saw next, it will be seared into my mind forever. A wound that will never heal. It wasn't an attic. It was a torture chamber. A man was suspended from the ceiling by his wrists, his body horribly stretched. Another was crammed into a small cage meant for a dog, his limbs broken and reset at grotesque angles. And the woman I saw first, chained to the wall, her mouth sewn shut with coarse thread. Everywhere there were implements, not tools of labor, tools of a butcher, a mad surgeon, whips embedded with sharp iron hooks, spiked collars designed to press inward, pliers. But the worst part was not what had been done to them. It was that they were still alive. Most of them, they didn't scream. They just moaned, weak, inhuman sounds. Their eyes were vacant, having passed beyond the threshold of pain into a place we could not follow. How do you rescue someone who has already been to hell while they are still breathing? How do you look into their eyes and not be shattered by the pain you see reflected there? I dropped my torch. I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. all my experience, all my courage as a firefighter. It all meant nothing in the face of a cruelty so calculated, so creatively perverse. This was not a crime of passion. This was the art of pain. And the artist, Madame Delphine Lalaurie, was still downstairs, worrying about her furniture. In that moment, I didn't just see victims. I saw the true face of evil. We brought them out, one by one, as gently as we could. When the crowd on Royal Street saw what we were carrying out of that house, their horror quickly turned to rage. It was no longer a curious crowd. It became a vengeful mob. They stormed the mansion, and I didn't stop them. None of us did. We heard the sound of glass shattering, of a piano being smashed to pieces, of roars for justice. They leveled everything inside that house, trying to erase its crimes with violence. But it was too late. The evil had already been done, and the demon escaped. In the chaos, Madame Lalaurie and her husband boarded a carriage and vanished into the night. She was never caught, never made to pay for what she did, at least not in this world. That night, after it was all over, I went home. I tried to wash, but I couldn't get the smell off of me. I closed my eyes, and I saw those vacant eyes again. The fire on Royal Street had been extinguished, but another fire had been lit in my mind. One that would never go out. What is more terrifying? A ghost you cannot touch, or the memory of a flesh and blood demon that you let escape. Which haunting lasts longer? I wasn't fighting fires anymore. From that night on, I began to fight ghosts. Not the ones that linger in buildings, the ones that haunt your own memory.
Story 2. The Axeman of New Orleans. A Symphony of Fear. Has your breathing returned to normal yet? Has your heart stopped pounding against your ribs? I know it's difficult. The horror of the Lalaurie mansion is a naked kind of horror. It's real. It's tangible. We can see the walls that contained it. We can name the demon who committed it. It is a fear that we can identify. But I ask you this, is that the worst kind of fear? There is another kind of demon, one that isn't bound by brick walls or locked doors. A phantom that can pass through any threshold, a fear that can seep into your own home through the smallest of cracks. It isn't an event that happens in one place. It is a threat that can happen anywhere to anyone. And tonight, it could come for you. I know. A part of you wants to stop here, to turn off the podcast, switch on the lights, and tell yourself these stories are just the past. But if you stop now, you will never know what it feels like when an entire city is held hostage by a single phantom. When a killer doesn't just kill, but plays with the minds of thousands of potential victims. So I dare you, don't leave. Stay with me in the darkness a little longer. Follow me back in time to a different New Orleans, to the year 1919. A city where jazz music was both its soul and its only talisman. Do you have the courage to listen?
There it is again. Have you ever listened to the silence of your own home, only to realize it isn't silent at all? It's full of small sounds, the house settling, the wind whistling through a crack, the gurgle of the pipes. For my whole life, those sounds were a lullaby of safety. But tonight, they are a symphony of threats, I am sitting here in the darkness of my own kitchen, a butcher's knife in my hand. My wife, Maria, and my boy, Luca, are asleep upstairs. I told them I was just getting a drink of water, but I have been sitting here for hours, listening, and I heard it, a scrape, from the back alley right below the kitchen window. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't a branch. It was metal, like someone sharpening something, or testing a chisel against my back door frame. My heart is beating so hard I'm afraid it will wake my family. Cold sweat runs down my spine. Every muscle in my body is coiled, ready to spring, to fight, to die. I don't dare breathe. I just stare at the bolt on the back door, praying that it's strong enough. Tonight, you don't know which sound is harmless and which is the footstep of the Axeman. And that's how he kills us. Not with the axe, but with the waiting. Only a year ago, New Orleans was paradise, especially for an Italian immigrant like me. We had our own small, tight-knit community here. My grocery store, Amato's Provisions, was the heart of my family. Every morning, I'd open the doors and the air would fill with the smell of garlic, of provolone cheese hanging from the ceiling, and of the fresh bread Maria had just baked. Think about the place you feel safest in the world. Your home? Your neighborhood? For me, this was that place. The French Quarter wasn't just for business. It was home. Our neighbors were our friends. We went to church together. We had dinners together. Our children played in the street together. And the music. Oh, the music was everywhere. The brassy shout of a trumpet from a bar. The lazy notes of a piano from an open window. It was the heartbeat of this city, a happy, hopeful beat. Life was hard, yes, but it was simple, and it was good. My biggest worry back then was whether the next shipment of olives would arrive on time. I could never have imagined that the very things I loved most, my Italian community, my grocery, even the music, were about to become the epicenter of a nightmare. I could not imagine that a fear could seep into this safe place, turning familiar faces into potential mourners and turning my home into a trap. The first crack appeared one morning in May, a story in the Times-Picayune. A grocer, Joseph Maggio, and his wife brutally attacked in their sleep. An intruder had used an axe. The entire neighborhood was in shock. A terrible crime. But at the time, that's all it was. A crime. A single event. We prayed for the Maggio family and were a little more careful. But then, a few weeks later, another one. A Polish baker also attacked with an axe. Then another, and another. A pattern began to emerge. A pattern that turned our blood to ice. Most of the victims were Italian American. Like me, many of them were grocers. Like me. Fear changes shape when it has a name, doesn't it? Before, it was just the attacks. But then the newspaper gave him a name. The Axeman. With that name, he was no longer an anonymous criminal. He became a character, a boogeyman, a legend being written in the blood of people just like you. The safety of our neighborhood evaporated. The joyful evening gatherings were replaced by silence and bolted doors. I started to look at my customers differently. I looked at my own neighbors and wondered. Suspicion is a plague, and the Axeman was its carrier. I found myself checking the locks multiple times before bed. And for the first time in my life, I began to look at the wood-chopping axe in my own backyard with a feeling of disgust. The fear became a part of life. It was like the humid New Orleans air. It seeped into everything. Business at the store slowed. People no longer went out in the evenings. Life shrank to the four walls of your home. But ironically, home was the most dangerous place to be. The police were helpless. They had no clues, no witnesses. The Axeman was like a phantom. He gained entry to locked homes by chiseling out a panel on the back door, committed his crime, and vanished without a trace. And then, in the spring of 1919, the horror escalated to a new, bizarre level. He wrote a letter. The letter was sent to the newspapers. It was arrogant, boastful. He claimed he was not human. He said he was a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. He claimed he could be invisible and pass through the thickest walls. What do you do when your enemy is not just a man, but an idea? A self-proclaimed demon? How do you fight something that claims to be from hell itself? The letter ended with an offer, or rather, a command. He declared that on a specific upcoming Tuesday night, he would be on the hunt again. But he would spare anyone who was in a home where jazz music was being played loudly. He was, he said, a fan of jazz. The entire city read that letter and collectively went mad. It wasn't a crime investigation anymore. It had become a supernatural event. We were no longer fighting a killer. We were trying to appease a demon. And the price of surviving the next Tuesday night was the very soul of our city's music. That night, the night of March 19th, 1919. I will never forget it. It was the strangest night in the history of New Orleans. As soon as the sun set, the music began. Every dance hall, every bar, every brothel, every private home exploded with jazz. Not one song, hundreds, thousands of different songs, all overlapping, creating a chaotic symphony of survival. We were no different. I had borrowed a gramophone from a neighbor. We sat in our living room, Maria, Luca, and I, and played the same jazz record over and over, as loud as it would go. Imagine that madness. An entire city partying for its life. The music wasn't joy, it was a plea. Could you dance while your heart is trying to beat its way out of your chest? Would you feel safe in the loudest noise? Or is it when the fear becomes most deafening? For me, it was absolute torture. The music was too loud. It filled every space, drowning out every other sound. I couldn't hear a creak on the stairs. I couldn't hear a footstep outside. I couldn't hear anything. Our talisman was also the very thing that made us deaf and blind in our own home. I sat there, holding my family, my eyes glued to the back door. Every shrill note from a trumpet made me jump. Every frantic drumbeat made my heart clench. We were playing music for a demon, hoping our melody would please him. It was the longest night of my life. A party no one wanted to attend. A dance with death. The next morning, the sun rose on an exhausted city. There were no new murders reported. It seemed the music had worked. The demon had been appeased. After that night, the attacks became less frequent. A few more occurred over the summer, and then he was gone. Just like that. The Axeman was never caught. His identity, his motive, all of it dissolved into the mist of history, becoming one of New Orleans' greatest mysteries. We had survived, but nothing was the same. The fear had left a permanent scar on our community. How can you ever truly trust again? What is more haunting? A monster that is defeated, or a monster that simply vanishes, leaving you to forever wonder if he's still out there, listening, waiting? The city found its joy again. Jazz music once more filled the streets, this time for happiness, not for fear. But for me, whenever I hear a familiar tune, a part of me is still back in that living room. On that night when my entire city had to play music to beg a phantom for our lives. And that is a melody that will never truly fade.
Story 3. The Myrtle's Plantation. The Stain in the Mirror. The city of New Orleans could finally breathe a sigh of relief as the Axeman vanished. The fear of a flesh and blood demon, one that could be stopped by a sturdy door, had at last passed. But I urge you to be wary of the silence. We will now leave the noisy streets, where fear screams and roars, for a place where the silence is infinitely more terrifying. A place where the external beauty is just a thin veneer, covering a rotting history of suffering. Where horror comes not from a demon's hatred, but from a spirit's endless sorrow. I am speaking of the southern plantations. Magnificent mansions that stand beneath ancient, moss-draped oaks, looking like widows wearing mourning veils. They are beautiful, are they not? But that beauty was built on a foundation of brutality and tears. And among all the plantations, there is one where that pain seems to never fade. A place nicknamed one of America's most haunted homes, the Myrtle's Plantation. They say at least 12 spirits wander its grounds. But one spirit, one tragedy, stands out above all others. The story of Chloe, an enslaved woman, and a mirror that supposedly trapped her spirit, and those of the children she accidentally poisoned. I know what you're thinking. Another ghost story in an old house. But believe me, this is no simple tale. And our next narrator, a modern-day tourist named Anna, went there with only curiosity. She left with horrifying proof and a haunting that will follow her forever. So I ask you, do you dare to look into a haunted mirror? Not just to find a ghost, but to confront the pain of the one trapped inside. Be careful what you search for. You just might find it.
It's impossible. It can't be. I'm staring at the screen of my phone and my heart has stopped. The photo I just took. It's there, the large antique mirror at the end of the room. In the reflection is me, standing with my phone in my hand. But I'm not alone. Have you ever taken a photo and seen something in it that definitely wasn't there when you pressed the button? That chilling moment when proof of the other side is lying right in the palm of your hand. Standing just behind my reflection is a faint, shadowy figure. A woman. I can vaguely make out a green turban wrapped around her head. But that's not the worst part. On the surface of the mirror in the photograph, right beside my reflection, are two small handprints. Tiny, like the handprints of a child pressed against the glass. My head snaps up, heart hammering, to look at the real mirror. It's empty. Just me. I look back down at the phone. She's still there. The handprints are still there. 21st century technology had just captured a 19th century tragedy. And I was standing in the same room with it. When we drove down the lane leading to the Myrtle's Plantation, I had to catch my breath. It was breathtakingly beautiful. A long avenue shaded by ancient live oaks, their branches interlocking to form a natural canopy, with Spanish moss hanging down like lace curtains. And at the end of the lane was the house, a graceful two-story mansion with a wraparound wrought iron balcony. Wow, this place is beautiful. I said to my boyfriend, Ben. Ben chuckled. Beautifully haunted, you mean? He teased. Careful, a ghost doesn't follow you home. I'm not a believer in ghosts. I'm a lover of history. To me, the ghost stories of the Myrtles Plantation were just part of the spice, a way to make the history more vivid. I was curious, but I was a skeptic. Can a place be both beautiful and terrifying at the same time? Can the beauty of ancient oaks and magnificent architecture truly hide the tragedies that have soaked into the very soil? At the time, I thought it could. I thought the past was the past. We checked into our room and it was gorgeous, with a high canopy bed, antique furniture, and a marble fireplace. The air in the room felt heavy, but I chalked it up to the weight of history, the age of the building. I felt like a safe tourist looking at the past through a museum glass. I had no idea that later that night, that glass was about to shatter. We took the mansion tour that afternoon. The guide was charismatic, telling us the history of the Woodruff family, of the tragedies and deaths that occurred behind these walls. And then she stopped us in front of a large mirror in the main hallway. It had a magnificent gilded frame, but the glass itself was spotted and old. This is one of the original pieces of furniture in the house, she said. And it is central to the most tragic story here. Legend says that an enslaved woman named Chloe was caught eavesdropping and was punished by having an ear cut off by her master. For revenge, she baked a birthday cake with poisoned oleander leaves, but the plan went wrong. The master's wife and 2 daughters ate the cake and died horribly. Chloe was then hanged by the other slaves and her body thrown into the Mississippi River. She paused, letting the story sink in. It is believed, she continued, that the spirits of the mistress and her 2 daughters were trapped inside this very mirror. Many guests have reported seeing small, childish handprints appear on the glass, or even the image of a woman in a green turban. The story was tragic, but at that moment it was still just a story. The first crack in my skepticism appeared that evening. Ben had fallen asleep on the bed, exhausted. I was sitting and reading when I heard it. A child's giggle, very distant, seemingly from the hallway. I told myself it was other guests. Then I smelled a scent. A very light perfume, the smell of lily, though there were no flowers in the room. Where is the line between imagination and reality? When you're in a haunted place, how do you know if that creak is just the old house settling or a footstep from someone long dead? I didn't know, but I was beginning to feel uneasy. That unease quickly turned into fear. Ben was still fast asleep, his steady breathing the only normal sound in a world that was slowly becoming strange. I heard the footsteps, unmistakably. Footsteps on the wooden floor of the main hall coming up the grand staircase. The steps were light, not a man's. They moved slowly and then they stopped, directly outside our door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock, but nothing came. Complete silence. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I worked up the courage to tiptoe to the door and look through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The fear of being alone in the dark is different, isn't it? When there's no one to turn to and say, "Did you hear that?" You start to question yourself. Is it the house that's haunted, or is it your own mind haunting you? I went back to bed, trying to convince myself I was just imagining things. I pulled the covers up to my chin and closed my eyes, and then I felt it, a change in the air. A sudden pocket of intense cold right beside the bed, and then a weight. An indentation formed on the mattress right beside me as if someone had just sat down. My eyes shot open. No one was there. The indentation remained for a second, then slowly faded away. I jolted upright, my heart racing. This wasn't my imagination. There was someone. or something in the room with me, I couldn't sleep. I didn't dare. I turned on the bedside lamp, but its weak yellow light only made the dark corners of the room seem more menacing. My eyes kept being drawn to the large mirror at the end of the room. That mirror where the spirits were trapped. A crazy idea entered my head. An unexplainable compulsion. I had to try. I had to know. I got out of bed, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. I grabbed my phone, feeling ridiculous. I stood before the mirror, looking at my own tired reflection. There's nothing here, I told myself. I raised my phone. And I took the picture. What do you do when 21st century technology captures a 19th century horror? When you hold undeniable proof in your hand, but it proves something your rational mind cannot accept? I stared at the screen, at the image of the woman in the green turban, at the childish handprints. I looked up at the real mirror empty. I looked back down at the phone. She was still there, looking at me through a digital world. A choked scream caught in my throat. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor with a dry crack. At that exact moment, the lamp on my bedside table flickered violently. Once, twice, then it went out, plunging the room into near total darkness. And in that darkness, I heard it. Right beside my ear, a woman's whisper filled with sorrow and longing. A single word. ... children. I screamed. This time I truly screamed. My scream woke Ben. He switched on the light, confused, asking what was wrong. The mirror. I saw her, I stammered, pointing a shaking finger. In my phone, I got a picture. I scrambled to pick up my phone, the screen now cracked. I opened the photo gallery. The last picture I took was just a black square. A corrupted file. Honey, you were having a nightmare, Ben said, putting his arms around me. Those stories just got to you. I tried to explain. About the footsteps, the indentation on the bed, the whisper. He listened, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. He thought I was overtired, too stressed. We checked out first thing the next morning. As we drove away down that beautiful oak-lined lane, I looked back at the mansion one last time. It looked so peaceful, so beautiful in the morning sun, as if nothing had happened. What is more terrifying? Seeing a ghost or being the only one who saw it? When you have to live with a terrible truth that no one else believes, do you eventually start to doubt your own sanity? I don't have the photo anymore. I don't have any proof. All I have is a memory. A memory of a trapped woman searching for her children in an old, dark mirror. The Myrtle's plantation is beautiful, but to me it will never be a beautiful place again. It's a tomb. And I heard the crying from inside.
Story 4. The Rougarou, Wrath of the Swamp. Anna's fear was a fear of what is left behind. A painful memory, a human tragedy imprisoned by walls and a looking glass. It is a tangible horror, a scar of history. But before there were plantations, before there were tragedies of masters and slaves, there was a primal land. And that land had its own fears. A fear more ancient, or not of sorrow, but of hunger. Not the spirit of a dead person, but a creature that was never truly alive in the way we understand. This is our final story in Louisiana. A story that comes not from a building, but from the mud and the mangroves themselves. A legend passed down not in writing, but in trembling whispers around a fire from one generation to the next. We will leave the ghosts behind to face the monster. This time, our narrator was not an unwilling victim thrown into a nightmare. He was once a hunter, a proud, young Cajun man who thought he was the master of this world. But he is about to learn a terrible lesson. In the primal dark, man is never the true predator.
It was there, right in front of me. My rifle, it was somewhere in the black mud. Useless. My knife felt like a toothpick. I was cornered on a small patch of land in the middle of the still water. You see, my grandson, there is a fear a man knows when he faces a bear or an alligator. It is the fear of nature, a fear with rules. But what do you feel when you face something that is not of nature? Something that stands on two legs, like a man, taller than any man I'd ever seen, but with the head of a rabid wolf, and eyes that glowed red, like embers from hell. It stepped out from behind a cypress tree, and I could smell it. The smell of wet fur, old blood, and something fundamentally wrong. It didn't roar like a beast. It breathed a wheezing, calculated breath, and in those eyes I saw more than just hunger. I saw hatred. This was not an animal. It was a curse made of flesh and blood. And it had come for me. Audio direction. The tense sounds fade, replaced by the gentle glide of a small pirogue through water, the sound of birds, and wind rustling through reeds, SFX, canoe paddling gently, birds chirping, wind through reeds, music, a simple, slightly melancholy Cajun-style acoustic guitar melody. For you to understand the terror of that night, you must first understand my arrogance back then. At that time, I was only 20 years old. I was born and raised in the Atchafalaya Basin. The swamp was not a scary place to me. It was home. Have you ever known a place so well that you think you own it? I knew every creek, every channel. I knew the call of every bird, knew where the fish were biting, where to set my crawfish traps. I could read the swamp the way a city man reads a book. I respected it, of course. My mamang always taught me to respect the swamp. But I did not fear it. I had heard the stories of the Rougarou since I was a boy. The old ones told them to scare us from wandering off at night. A monster, half man, half wolf, that hunted those who didn't observe Lent. To me, they were just fairy tales, the superstitions of an older generation. I was a practical man. I believed in what I could see and touch. The rifle on my shoulder, the knife in my boot, and my own skill. That arrogance, you see, is a dangerous thing. Because the swamp, it always has one more secret it hasn't told you yet. And that night, I went too deep, too confident, and the swamp decided it was time for me to learn the lesson of fear. I was hunting alone that night, frog hunting. The moon was full and bright, a perfect night for it. I had gone into a part of the swamp few people ever went, a place where the old cypress trees looked like giant skeletons. The first crack wasn't a sound, but the lack of it. The swamp speaks its own language, my boy. A man who lives there learns it. But what do you do when the swamp suddenly goes silent? That silence, it is the loudest warning of all. It is the sound of every living thing holding its breath, because a true predator is near. My heart began to beat a little faster. I stopped my pirogue and listened. Nothing. it was too quiet. I told myself it was probably just a large gator nearby. Then I saw the tracks on a small mud bank. They were strange, larger than any bear track I'd ever seen, and shaped almost like a man's foot, but with long claws. I had never seen anything like it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My arrogance began to dissolve, replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Unease. I started hearing noises in the distance. A snapping twig, a rustle in the reeds. But they weren't random sounds. They seemed to be ... following me. The swamp, my home, suddenly felt alien and hostile. The feeling of being watched grew stronger and stronger. My reason screamed, "Go back," and I listened. I turned my pirogue around and began to paddle for home as fast as I could. But the feeling of being followed didn't go away. It got stronger. I glanced over my shoulder, and at the edge of the faint light from my lantern, I saw it. A movement. A large, dark shape, moving parallel to me between the trees. It was too fast, too big. Fear gives you strength, Nan. It makes you paddle faster, run farther, but it also makes you stupid. It makes you miss the familiar turn in the bayou you have known your whole life. It steals your breath and your reason. How can you fight an enemy when your own fear is your greatest betrayer? I panicked. I paddled blindly, trying to put distance between us. And then I heard the howl. It was not the howl of a wolf. It was higher, more pained, and it ended in something that was almost a human roar. That sound went straight to my bone marrow, freezing the blood in my veins. Every fairy tale, every warning from the old women suddenly became a horrifying reality. The Rougarou, it was real, and it was hunting me. I paddled so hard the oar nearly snapped. I had to get away, but the more I panicked, the more the swamp seemed to close in around me. The familiar waterways now looked like a hostile maze. It struck the boat, a powerful blow from the side that flipped my pirogue over. I was thrown into the cold, dark water. My rifle sank into the black mud. I thrashed, choked, and swam desperately for a nearby patch of dry land. I dragged myself onto the bank, covered in mud, shaking from cold and fear. I had lost my weapon, my boat, my bearings, and it was standing there, at the other edge of the small island, waiting. It was the sight I told you about at the beginning. The monster, when the rifle in your hand is useless, and the knife feels like a toothpick, ... what is left? You have only your wits and the grace of God. And on that night, I think God must have looked away for a moment to see if I could survive on my own. It lunged at me faster than anything I'd ever seen. I had no time to think. I acted on pure instinct. My oil lantern, still hanging from my belt, was miraculously unbroken. I ripped it free, opened the cap, and threw it with all my might at the creature. The oil splashed across its chest and instantly caught fire. It roared a terrible sound, a roar of pain and fury, as flames erupted on its fur. It was no longer focused on me. It was frantically rolling on the ground, trying to smother the fire. That was my chance. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I ran like I'd never run in my life, through the mud, through thorn bushes, ignoring everything but the need to escape. Behind me, I could still hear its enraged roars. I ran all night. I don't know where I went. I just picked a direction and hoped it would lead to people. As the sun began to rise, I collapsed at the edge of my village, covered in mud and blood, exhausted. People found me delirious, rambling about a monster with red eyes. Some thought I had gone mad, but the older ones, they looked at me with understanding. They knew what I had seen. The arrogance of my youth died in the swamp that night. I survived, but I was a changed man. I never went that deep into the swamp alone at night again. I still hunted, I still fished, but with a new respect. A respect born from absolute terror. They say, if you survive the Rougarou attack and do untell a soul for 101 days, the curse passes from it to you. I am an old man now. My grandson, do you wonder why, after so many years of silence, I am telling you this story tonight? Do you wonder just how many days I have been counting?
Take a deep breath. We have returned. Let your heart beat slow. Let the suffocating air of Louisiana leave your lungs. We have just passed through a symphony of fear. 4 chapters written in blood, tears, and ancient curses. We began in an attic, facing the horror hidden behind the magnificent doors of the elite crew, that human cruelty knows no bounds. Then, we lived in the invisible fear that crept through every alley of New Orleans, as an entire city played music to appease a demon with an axe. We felt the sorrow of injustice, trapped in a mirror at the Myrtle's Plantation, where the tragedy of the past refuses to fade. And finally, we fled from the most primal fear in the swamp, when we came face to face with a monster born from the land itself. All of these stories have one thing in common, one thread that connects them all. It isn't the ghosts or the demons. It is the land itself. Louisiana, a land intoxicated by its own history, where every street corner and every oak tree has a story to tell, and not all of them have happy endings. Thank you for bravely joining Horror Stories Hub on this journey through the darkness of Louisiana. We led the way, but it was you who walked through it. And now, it is your turn. Where will our journey go next? This is where you become part of the story. Let us know in the comments below. Which state's horror do you want us to explore next? From the haunted forests of Pennsylvania, to the native legends of Arizona, or the cold cases of Texas? And more importantly, through which witness's eyes do you want to hear the story? Do you want to become a park ranger facing an unknown creature? A police officer investigating a bizarre, unsolved case? A child living in a haunted house? Or a sole survivor recounting an unimaginable tragedy? The choice is yours. Tell us the state and the perspective you want to experience. We will be listening. If these stories have left their mark on your mind, leave a like so that the fear may spread. And press the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never have to walk into the darkness alone again. Until next time, be careful with local legends. You never know which stories are real